under the golden glow of chandeliers and the low hum of laughter. I stood in the marble lobby of the Four Seasons, clutching my tiny clutch bag like it was armor. You wouldn't think humiliation could have a scent, but it does. It smells like perfume you can't afford and champagne you'll never taste. That was the night my daughter-in-law, Leilani, called me the waitress in front of half the city's elite. And that was also the night I met the deaf mother of a billionaire, the woman whose words would change my life forever. I should have known better than to wear the navy blue dress. 3 years old, bought for an anniversary dinner that never happened. Still, it was the nicest thing I owned. And when my son Desmond told me, "Mom, it's black tie optional, just try to look nice," I wanted to make him proud. I saved for 2 months to get my hair done at a real salon, not the $5 place next to the laundromat, for 20 minutes before the ache crept into my feet. I even felt beautiful. Then I walked into that ballroom, white roses, crystal chandeliers, tuxedos everywhere, and realized beauty doesn't mean much when you're standing in the wrong world. I found my table halfway back, not front enough to be important, not back enough to disappear. And that's when she appeared, Leilani red silk flowing like fire, a smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Nan," she said sweetly, loud enough for nearby ears. "I'm so surprised you actually came," I smiled, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course I came. I'm proud of Desmond." She tilted her head, eyes gliding over me. "That dress is charming, very practical." Heat crawled up my neck while polite laughter fluttered like moth wings around us. I wanted to ask where my son was, but she answered before I could. "Networking with the Morrison executives. Very important conversations not really appropriate for, well, you understand." I did understand. My son was ashamed of me. Still, when Desmond's name was called, I clapped until my palms stung, watching him on that stage, tall, confident, smiling for the cameras. I forgot about Leilani for a moment. Pride filled my chest like air after a long dive, but the feeling didn't last. During the cocktail hour, I found myself alone again, invisible among the glitter. That's when Leilani returned, a small crowd of women trailing behind her, all polished and perfect. "Ladies," she announced, "this is my mother-in-law, Nan. She's a waitress." The word landed like a slap. "At Denny's," she added brightly. "You know, the pancake place." They smiled that brittle society smile. One murmured, "It must be so fulfilling to serve others." Another said, "Honest work is admirable." I wanted to tell them about the double shifts, the years I worked through holidays so my son could go to college, how I gave up everything just so he could stand where he was tonight. But words stuck in my throat. Then Leilani laughed, soft and cruel. Can you imagine? At her age, still slinging hash browns? Some people never learn to aspire higher. She'll probably die in that uniform, poor and stupid, just like she's always been. The silence after that was colder than any insult. Even her friends looked away. I turned, blinking fast, refusing to let tears fall. Not here, not in front of them. I headed for the restroom, but halfway down the hall, I heard a rhythmic tapping a cane on marble. Steady and deliberate, the sound pulled me toward the coat check, where an elderly woman sat alone on a velvet bench, elegant in a midnight blue gown, silver hair swept into a perfect bun. She looked as lost as I felt. Her eyes met mine, soft, searching, and I realized with a jolt she wasn't following the sounds around her. She was deaf. I lifted my hands, rusty but certain, and signed slowly. "Are you deaf? Can you understand sign language?" Her face transformed instantly. She smiled a real, radiant smile and signed back. "Yes. You know ASL," I nodded, my throat tight. My mother was deaf. I took care of her for 15 years. Her hands moved gracefully. That must have been such a blessing for her. "I'm Eleanor Morrison." The name hit me like thunder. Morrison, as in Morrison Industries. I swallowed hard. "I'm Nan." She nodded, her eyes kind. "You look like someone who needed a friend tonight." For the first time all evening, I exhaled. Two women from opposite worlds, bound by silence and the language of hands. You belong anywhere you choose to be. She signed with firm grace, and somehow, I believed her. Marcus found us by the coat check, his tuxedo a dark mirror of every powerful man in that building, but his eyes softer when they landed on his mother. "Mother, I've been looking everywhere," he said carefully so she could read his lips, and her fingers flew, introducing me with the pride of someone unveiling something precious. When he turned to me with that standard-issue, polite executive smile, Eleanor's hands paused and then shaped a truth that cut through the ceremony fog. She signed and spoke at once. She learned sign language to care for her deaf mother for 15 years. I watched the calculation drain from his expression, replaced by something like recognition. "My grandmother did factory shifts after my grandfather died," he said, voice low with memory. And I felt the room tilt, the invisible hierarchy bending by a few degrees, as if decency itself had gravity. I said softly that I waitressed at Denny's and had for 2 decades, expecting the old dismissal. But he surprised me. He said it like a compliment. That's real endurance. Eleanor looked between us, eyes bright. "Marcus, I have an idea," she said, and the air seemed to hold its breath. She laid it out as if she'd been turning the wheel in her mind all night, a personal assistant role. Not a trophy companion, but a bridge someone to manage her schedule, accompany her to events, protect her attention, speak her language. "The position starts at $60,000 with full benefits," she said, her voice steady, her hands repeating the offer like a benediction. I stared at her as if she'd pulled a sunrise from her evening bag. I whispered, "Why me?" Eleanor's smile softened into steel. "Because you were kind when there was nothing to gain. Character cannot be bought." Marcus glanced between us, weighing liability against legacy, and finally nodded. "Let's start with a trial period," he said. Eleanor placed a card in my shaking hand. "Monday, 9 a.m. My office," she instructed. I tucked that small piece of cardstock into my clutch like you tuck away a lifeline. By 8:45 a.m. on Monday, I was in the cathedral-bright lobby of the Morrison Tower, palms damp, watching cufflinks flash as the city's bloodstream flowed past security. A woman in a gray suit with calm eyes approached and said, "Mrs. Brennan, I'm Sarah Chen, Mrs. Morrison's assistant, in the elevator." Floors rose like held notes while she told me she'd been balancing this role with an MBA and had just accepted a consulting job. "Mrs. Morrison is brilliant," she said, smiling. "She only bristles when people pretend she can't understand the room." Then the doors opened on a corridor of quiet power photographs of factory floors and ribbon cuttings, and Eleanor's corner office caught the morning light like it was owed to her. She waved me in and slid a thick folder across a small round table, salary typed in neat lines, benefits spelled out with the care of someone who had fought for fairness before. There was even a performance bonus up to $15,000 if I exceeded expectations. Eleanor signed. "The work is simple to name and hard to do. Be my ears, my calendar, my shield, my friend." I told her I understood because the truth was I had been training for this my whole life without knowing it. All morning, Sarah walked me through passwords and preferences, names and histories, the choreography of a day that protected Eleanor's energy without isolating her soul. When we broke at 12 p.m., Eleanor added a detail with a mischievous taper to her smile. She wanted me beside her at a fundraiser on Friday at 1 p.m., an apprenticeship in the glare of chandeliers. "Consider it a rehearsal," she said, and the word rehearsal made the entire building feel like a stage waiting for a cleaner. Braver scene to begin. The next morning, at 7 a.m., my phone rang sharp as a dropped plate. Desmond, breath tight, said, "What did you do at the gala?" Marcus called my firm. "Stay away from the Morrisons. Don't contact her again." I told him that nothing happened except decency. He didn't hear it. I could almost feel Leilani standing behind his anger like a prompter feeding lines. The old ache rose, the urge to fold. To apologize for existing, then. Eleanor's words anchored me. Character cannot be bought. I start Monday, I said softly, even though I had already started. He hung up. The silence that followed didn't flatten me. It introduced me to my own spine. On Friday at 12:40 p.m., I stood in my navy dress again, the one I once thought made me small, breathing evenly before the doors opened. Eleanor's car rolled to a stop. Her cane tapped once, twice, a third time, and we walked into the fundraiser together, two women in step. I didn't know that night would light the fuse that changed everything, or that kindness could be weaponized into power, but I felt it, rising like a tide behind my ribs. The fundraiser glimmered with the kind of effortless wealth that never needed to announce itself, crystal glasses catching afternoon light, conversations stitched together by laughter that never quite reached the eyes. Eleanor moved through it like she was both guest and ghost, smiling graciously, her hand on my arm as if I were her anchor. I stayed close, signing softly to translate stray compliments or questions. She seemed radiant, alive in the small rebellion of being seen. At one point, a woman in pearls leaned close and said to me, "It's wonderful that you're helping her. Poor thing. It must be so hard being deaf." Before I could respond, Eleanor caught my eye, read the woman's lips, and signed with impeccable tongue. Hard, only when people assume silence means weakness. I translated her words aloud. The woman flushed and muttered something about getting another drink. Eleanor smiled a slow, satisfied smile that told me she'd enjoyed every second of it. As the afternoon waned, I felt a lightness in her I hadn't seen before, as if some long, clenched muscle had finally relaxed. On the way back to the car, she rested her gloved hand over mine. "You did beautifully," she said aloud, her speech deliberate but steady. Then she switched to sign language, her eyes soft. "I told you we'd have fun. Did you notice your son's wife was there?" I froze. I hadn't. But now the image clicked a flash of red silk near the champagne tower, Leilani's practiced smile lighting up the room. She didn't approach us. I signed. "No," Eleanor replied, her expression unreadable. But she saw us, and sometimes that's enough. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed the way Leilani had looked at me across the room, half shock, half contempt, as if she'd seen a ghost rise from the ashes of her own cruelty. I wondered what she'd tell Desmond now. Probably that I was chasing attention, that I'd embarrassed her again. But the truth was simpler for the first time in years. I wasn't embarrassed of anything. 3 years passed in the kind of quiet rhythm that builds a life. Days began at 7 a.m. with tea and the faint tap of Eleanor's cane echoing down the marble hall, and ended with conversations in sign language that felt more intimate than speech. We shared everything: our childhood stories, the griefs that had carved us into who we were, the laughter that had survived them. When she told me her heart was weakening, I moved into the guest wing without hesitation. I became her shadow, her translator, her daughter, in all but blood. Desmond and Leilani drifted farther away with every passing month. They still lived in the world of business dinners and private clubs, where image mattered more than integrity. Desmond would text occasionally short, polite check-ins, but his tone always carried that same distance, as if I were a reminder of something he'd rather forget. Then one November morning at 7:30 a.m., I found Eleanor struggling to breathe. Her lips were pale, her eyes frightened but calm. "Call Marcus," she whispered. Within minutes, paramedics filled the apartment with the efficient chaos of emergency care. Marcus arrived at the hospital, jacket half-buttoned, eyes red with fear. For 3 days, we kept vigil by her bedside. She drifted in and out, her hands trembling as she signed small fragments of thought. "Thank you. Stay. Promise." On the 4th evening, her eyes found mine with sudden clarity. "Nan," she signed weakly. "I need to tell you something." I leaned close, clutching her hand. "I've changed my will," she continued, every motion deliberate, each gesture a thread of effort. I tried to hush her, but she shook her head. Listen, Marcus will have the company, the houses, everything he's earned. But you? I'm leaving you the apartment and a trust fund $2 million. You'll run the foundation we planned for the deaf and their families. The world narrowed to the soft beep of monitors and the weight of her words. Eleanor. I signed, shaking my head. I can't accept that. Her gaze sharpened, fierce even as her breath weakened. You can, you must. You gave me dignity. You gave me love. Now let me give you freedom. I wept then, silent tears tracing the edges of her fingers as she smiled faintly. Remember, she signed, you were never the disappointment. You were always the blessing. That night, she passed away with her hand still in mine. When the morning light broke over the hospital windows, I knew my life had shifted again quietly, completely, forever. The funeral at St. Patrick's Cathedral was a spectacle of polished grief. Marble pillars, white lilies, and cameras from every newspaper in the city. The world had come to mourn a woman who had given them hospitals, scholarships, and hope. I sat in the family section beside Marcus, my black dress simple against the sea of tailored wool. I could feel Desmond and Leilani a few rows behind me. They hadn't spoken to me since the gala 3 years ago, but their presence pressed against my back like a weight. During the eulogy, Marcus's voice wavered only once, when he said, "My mother believed kindness was a form of intelligence." I looked down at my folded hands and thought of how she'd signed those very words to me one evening over tea. After the final hymn, the guests flowed toward the reception in Eleanor's penthouse, a parade of condolences and diamond bracelets. I kept to the corner, greeting people who didn't quite know where to place me, not staff, not family, not society, somewhere in between, where truth usually lives. Then I heard it, Leilani's voice, bright and cutting. "It's absolutely disgusting," she whispered to a cluster of women. That waitress wormed her way into Mrs. Morrison's life. People like that always think kindness is a career strategy. The women tittered softly, hungry for gossip. "Mark my words," Leilani went on. "She'll walk away with nothing. Rich people don't leave money to their maids." I didn't turn. I didn't need to. Some storms aren't worth facing when you've already learned how to stand in the rain. The will reading came a week later. Morrison Industries' legal offices smelled faintly of leather and cold coffee, the scent of power. Marcus and I sat side by side while the attorney, Mr. Whitfield, adjusted his glasses and began to read. The formal phrases blurred together until I heard my name. To Nyan Brennan, who became the daughter I never had. I leave my penthouse apartment at 1 Central Park West and a trust fund in the amount of $2 million, managed until such time as Mrs. Brennan assumes direct control. The room went still. Marcus inhaled sharply, not in shock, but in quiet respect. Mr. Whitfield continued, "Additionally, Mrs. Morrison has established the Patterson-Morrison Foundation for Deaf Services with an initial endowment of $5 million. Mrs. Brennan is named as the foundation's first executive director with an annual salary of $120,000. For a moment, I thought I might faint. The numbers felt unreal, like something written for someone else. Marcus placed a steady hand over mine. "She always said you were her best investment," he whispered. When we left the office, the city looked different, sharper, brighter, alive with possibility. The next morning at 7 a.m., my phone erupted with the familiar insistence of Desmond's panic. "Mom, we need to talk. Leilani says there's been a mistake in the will." His voice carried the same practiced authority he used with clients. "People might think you manipulated her. This could ruin me at work." I let him talk until the words circled back on themselves, then said quietly, "Eleanor was evaluated by doctors. Everything was documented. There was no mistake." He hesitated. I heard Leilani in the background, sharp as a blade. "Let me talk to her," she demanded. Then her voice slid through the receiver. Syrup over steel, Nayen, "Honey, we're not saying you don't deserve something small, but millions." Surely you see that keeping that money from her real family would be wrong. Her real family. The phrase landed like a stone in a clear pond. Eleanor was my real family, I said evenly. She treated me with more love and respect in 3 years than you have in your entire marriage. Leilani tried to interrupt, but I continued. She left me dignity, purpose, and freedom, the things you'll never understand because you spend your life measuring worth in labels and invitations. I hung up before she could twist it into another performance. That night, I walked through the penthouse, my penthouse touching the walls Eleanor had once walked past with her cane tapping softly. The silence was warm, not empty. I promised her aloud, I'll make it mean something. And for the first time in my life, I believed I could. The months that followed were a blur of purpose. The Patterson-Morrison Foundation became my heartbeat, its office filled with laughter and the quiet rhythm of signing hands. We offered free ASL classes, job programs, and support networks for deaf seniors who'd spent decades in silence. Every decision I made, I asked myself, what would Eleanor do? I worked harder than I ever had at Denny's, but this time, exhaustion felt like grace. Each success was a stitch repairing the torn fabric of my self-worth. Marcus guided me with steady patience, introducing me to people who believed in Eleanor's legacy. He said once, half smiling, Mother would have been proud. You've built something that feels like her heart still beats here. Meanwhile, Desmond and Leilani grew desperate. They tried everything: lawyers, gossip, even a journalist who called to confirm rumors about manipulation. But Eleanor had been meticulous. Every conversation, every signature, every medical evaluation was documented. The journalist dropped the story after 2 days. Truth, it seemed, didn't sell as well as scandal. Still, the whispers in Desmond's social circles continued, and I knew Leilani was behind them. They painted me as a cunning opportunist, the waitress who seduced pity into fortune. It might have hurt once. Now, it barely reached me. Eleanor had taught me something no humiliation ever could, that power lies in stillness, not noise. 6 months later, the foundation hosted its first major fundraising gala. The venue was the same hotel where this story had begun. I arrived early, wearing a silver gray gown Eleanor had chosen for me years ago. I stood under the chandeliers that had once mocked me and smiled. The room no longer made me feel small. It was just a room. The power had never belonged to it. It had always been inside me. When the evening began, I took the stage, my speech trembling at first, then steadying with conviction. Communication is not charity. I told the audience, it is connection, it is respect, and every person who learns to listen with hands, with patience, with heart, becomes part of something greater. The applause rose slowly at first, then built into warmth that filled the hall. By the end of the night, we'd raised over $300,000. That's when I saw him, Desmond, standing near the back of the room, alone. No Leilani in sight. He looked older, worn. When the crowd began to thin, he approached quietly. "Mom," he said, his voice hesitant, "can we talk?" I led him to a quiet corner where the light from the chandeliers softened against the marble. "I owe you an apology," he began, eyes downcast. "Actually, I owe you 30 years of them. Leilani and we're getting divorced. She was having an affair, and I realized. I let her convince me to be ashamed of you. I let her voice drown out what I should have seen for myself." His voice broke. "I saw you speak tonight. People listened. They respected you. You're everything I pretended not to come from." For a moment, I said nothing. His words ached like an old wound reopening. "Desmond," I said gently, "I appreciate your apology, but you need to understand I'm not the same woman you once looked down on. I don't need approval anymore." He nodded, tears threatening. "I know. I want to try. To earn your respect." I studied him, this man I'd raised alone, whose success had cost me the softness of my own heart for years. And finally, I said, "Then start by learning what respect really means." He looked up, confused. until I lifted my hands and began to sign slowly, deliberately. Respect begins when you learn to listen. He smiled through his tears and signed back, clumsily but sincerely. Teach me. A year later, the foundation opened its second branch. The ribbon cutting was in my garden. Behind the modest home, I'd bought a place filled with sunlight and Eleanor's roses. Desmond stood beside me, fluent now in the language that had once built walls between us. Marcus joined us too, and for a moment, the world felt full circle. As the sun set, I touched the locket Eleanor had given me. Inside, our photo, her hand over mine, and the engraving that read, "To the daughter of my heart. You were never the disappointment. You were always the blessing." Some people spend their lives searching for someone who truly sees them. I found that person when I needed her most, and through her, I learned to see myself. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were in my place? I read every word you write, and your stories mean more than you know.